So they kind of started thinking maybe we need to. Now, Texas being the state that says, we're going to do whatever the bloody hell we want, said, no, we're not doing it. We're leaving it at 0.10. I remember one of the first trips I came out here to visit my sister down in near Houston. We're walking out to the car. She pops the trunk, pops the cooler, and hands me a beer. And I'm like, we still have to drive home. She goes, oh, no, it's legal here. And I'm like, oh, really? Great state. Okay, this is good. So we drove home with a can of beer. There was no such thing as open container laws then. And Texas basically told the federal government, we're not changing. We like the 0.10. That's where we're going to stay. And, of course, they have the right to do what they want within their own borders. And feds went, okay. But that $750 billion in highway funds that we give to the state, we don't have that money anymore. Bye. So, obviously, Texas changed their mind and came in line with everybody else at 0.08, enacted the open container laws, and so on. And that's where it has stayed. There are people still pushing to get us down to match Europe at 0.05, because that's what it is in most of Europe. But even moving from 0.10 to 0.08, the estimate saves about 500 lives. Yeah, that doesn't sound like a lot in how many millions of people do we have here, but I'm sure to those 500 million, it matters, or those 500 rather, sorry. Obviously, we got all kinds of programs out there. MAD started, everyone familiar with that? Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Students Against Drunk Driving, and so on. We've got plenty of programs out there. But the key is, A, it has to start very early, and 2, you need to reach into the homes. By the time they hit school, it may be too late, depending on how the family dynamic is. So obviously, the more we can do, the better as far as what goes on behind the wheel. And keep in mind, in many, many alcohol-related crashes, the person who is under the influence very often walks away while other people die. This is not unusual in the slightest. So it's other lives that we're saving. So some of the things we've developed, more modern. This is one that's out there. The interlock device is placed on the car. They have to blow into it before they can the computer unlocks and allows them to start the car. Anybody see any way around this? No, have your friend blow into it.
You can't do that. My friend's truck has a cam.
Does it? Okay, so they must have, yeah. They got cams now. Okay, well, the ones I saw didn't, so good. There it is. Okay, can't do that. But they all states now have some sort of interlock device here. The highest I've seen is a guy who came into our jail with 9 previous DUIs. 9. Okay, so it's, 1 DUI is not going to stop him. 2 isn't, 3 isn't. Not to an alcoholic. You're not going to stop them. So. Now, are there some good things? Yeah, there are. Little itty bitty. For those of you with problems with your cholesterol, they have found that a very, very limited amount of alcohol can increase your good cholesterol. Okay. 1 glass of wine. That's it. Some have found a tentative, very light link to reducing the risk of various other things, okay? So drinking a 5th a day, just say you're elevating your benefits, isn't going to cut it here, okay? Obviously, there are some negatives. We've talked about pregnancy. There is no safe amount of alcohol. And again, just like the previous one, they found some very minor, very inconclusive links to breast cancer for females. So how much of this can we prove? Very little. Very little, okay? But the link is there. So what happens when somebody moves all the way into abuse, alcoholic? A lot of people call this the hidden addiction because it's not as visible. People don't think about it. Back to our priest who only drank on that one night out of the week, out of the public view. And of course, there's no family around, so they're not seeing anything either, okay? And if you're drinking to the point of a blackout, yeah, you're an alcoholic. So this is one that's easier to conceal. Common thing people do, for example, you got this nice big bar in your home and you got all different kinds of alcohol. And what they'll do is as they drink out of a bottle, they'll add water back in there. Some go to the extent of actually coloring the water to make sure it doesn't change color and so on. Which again, that casual look as you walk past the bar, you may not notice it. And alcohol, we talked about this right at the beginning. Look at these commercials. You can't have fun unless you're drinking. You're going to the beach. You're going to the party. You're going here. You're going there. If you're on Reddit, how many, especially Am I the Asshole? That's an absolutely fun Reddit. Where people are complaining they want to have a dry wedding. They want no alcohol served. Maybe one member of the wedding party is a recovering alcoholic or something like this. And the whole crowd goes berserk. How can you possibly not allow alcohol at a wedding? That's how tightly it's woven into our expectations and beliefs that without the alcohol, it can't possibly be fun. All right? So, you know, the guy who's flat out in the corner on heroin, everyone kind of goes, ew. But the person who drinks too much, they kind of shrug it off. He's just drinking too much. He's just that way. Ain't that big a deal. Okay. Now, obviously, from a drug point of view, alcohol creates any one of a number of problems, not the least of which, if they have a medical emergency or disease, treating them becomes immensely more complicated. And in some things, if a person's in the middle of DTs and they've just shattered their femur, which, by the way, is the biggest bone in the body, it's not fun, very large amounts of pain involved. But the person's in the middle of DTs, can they give them pain drugs? No, none. That's a problem. That's a problem. Maybe they need to undergo surgery. They can't put them under yet because they can't tolerate the anesthesia. So, yeah, there's problems. There's problems. One thing we notice, like in any other drug, an addict has one word in their vocabulary, and it's whatever drug they're addicted to. And it's no different for an alcoholic. Their world, it surrounds alcohol. Finding it, getting it, consuming it. It may start as something simple of to be sociable, to be friendly. Just going to have a glass of wine because, you know, we kind of had a hard day at work or at school. And then 1 becomes 3, which becomes 5, and so on. As a tolerance builds and they're drinking more, it becomes more difficult to hide. Now we start seeing cravings like we would with any other drug. And it's not so much drinking to relieve tension, it's drinking to feel normal. Stealing alcohol, hiding it. Going to school with a thermos full of scotch and milk. Oh, God, I can't wrap my head around that. So, yeah, these are all indications we've got an issue. We've got an issue. Now, the other side of this, remember, alcohol is a depressant. That's not very helpful in someone who's already anxious or depressed to begin with. So they think they're drinking to feel better, and it makes them feel worse. Okay? We get a lot of suicide ideation with those drinking a lot, all the way to the full-blown alcoholic. Overall, they're no more likely than anybody else to have been involved in a major depressive episode. It's just that the alcohol is more likely to make it worse. Okay. What about their life? Well, obviously, jobs and careers can go bad very quickly. God forbid you're something like a pilot, a cop, fire department, medical personnel. Oh, just what I want. Some guy was flying with a scalpel around. Were they drunk in the cockpit? Oh, yeah, That's going to be fun. Social relationships can fall about. Okay, we want to go to a party and share a drink, but who wants to deal with the sloppy, puking, passing out drunk? That, one time it happens, you kind of shrug it off. But when you got that friend that's doing it all the time, guess what? Maybe we don't want this person at the party anymore. So the person starts getting isolated. Obviously, a family life can fall apart. And this all comes together. Can't hold a job, so they're not bringing in money. But they still got to pay for their drug. So how are they going to get it? They can reach out to friends, but sooner or later that's going to get burnt. And family will start pulling away. Now, there may be that one who continues to enable the individual. That's my son, I could never leave him. Okay. So she goes out and buys him the alcohol. But the family can still fall apart because then everyone else sees the alcoholic, that one doesn't, and refuses to believe it. So one leads to a problem with another, and it just becomes this great big mess. No different than any other drug. No different than any other drug. Now, what does it do overall to the body? A lot of not so good things. Okay, obviously, the biggest damage, like most drugs, is in the brain. Okay. One of the things that we noticed, which was pretty distinct, the brain actually shrinks with someone who has consumed large quantities of alcohol over a long period of time. They can actually measure the size difference. That's not good. Right? And obviously, there are plenty of diseases alcoholics can get, mainly around the liver, since the liver has to detox this stuff. Okay? And ethanol is hard on the liver. But the biggest thing that kind of got my attention was this fact that their brain shrinks. That's like freaky. Okay? Just like any other addict, I don't have a problem. I can quit anytime I want. Okay? Don't drink for the next 24 hours and wait for the meltdown. Doesn't even have to be 24 hours. And they're probably the worst when it comes to acknowledging they have a problem. Again, not quite sure why, but one possible explanation is alcohol is far more accepted amongst society than are most of our hard drugs, heroin, fentanyl, amphetamines, whatever. So there's plenty of outside societal pressures against the addict versus the alcoholic. Well, it's no big deal. I'm just drinking. Who cares? And at first, everybody around them tries to help, consciously or not. Maybe you're drinking just a little bit too much. Can you just maybe water them down or something? That's a common one for someone who's into the mixed drinks. Water it down. Cut them off after a few drinks. Okay? These are all enabling attitudes that simply allow them to continue functioning despite their drinking. Like any other addict, the only way to handle it is cold turkey, shut it off. The people don't want to deal with that. Afraid they'll lose the family member, lose their friend. And what you have to remember is you've already lost your friend. That's the only way to get them back. So yeah, that's why we don't just have AA. We also have what? Anybody know what the side group is? It's one for teens and one for the rest of the family. These are based on the Alcoholics Anonymous format, but it's there specifically to support the family and the teens of an alcoholic. How not to enable, how you can support them, without enabling further drinking. It's not easy, obviously. A spouse, a parent, a brother or sister. No, it's not easy. But these support groups give them a way and give them resources to use to help. We call this codependency, and it's just as different members of the family try and help. And unfortunately, they're not helping. They're enabling. But they don't know that. And even if they do, they deny it to themselves. All right. Obviously, just like many other things, the children of alcoholics are far more likely to become alcoholics themselves. Why? Because alcohol is just available, it's there, it's used. Somebody getting passed out drunk is no big deal. They may offer it to the child. And I'm talking children here. Join in. Here's a drink. Okay. There are people that react differently to alcohol in their system. Some have what we call a low response, others have high. A high responder gets pretty drunk on a low amount of alcohol. So they have a drink, what we would call, or you guys probably still use, a lightweight. They have a drink, they're already drunk. Okay, we know some of those. And then you have those, not that they're all that physically imposing, but it seems like they can drink like a fish and just keep going. And you're kind of like, wow. Okay. Those individuals, particularly male, that can drink a lot without a visible signs of being drunk are far more likely to become an alcoholic. Because in their head, they can drink more and more and more. Doesn't mean that it's not affecting the body. It is. They just handle it a little better until they hit that alcoholic stage. Okay? Obviously, if you're a child of an alcoholic and you're male with a high tolerance to alcohol, add the two together, you've got about an 80% chance of becoming an alcoholic. That's pretty high. That is pretty high. Okay? They're still running, I don't want to say tests, experiments, so to speak, to find out, just like we tried to figure out where crime tendencies came from. Was it genetic? You know, if your parents were doing life in prison, were you more likely to become a criminal? Or was it environmental factors around you that turned you into a criminal? And of course, over a very long period of time, we figured out it was probably a little bit of both. That's what we're trying to figure out with alcohol. We've got some that say there's some genetics. We know the children of alcoholics are more likely to become an alcoholic. Okay, that's genetics. But then there's environmental functions as well. We've had kids that the parents are stone alcoholics and they won't touch the stuff. So that relationship, obviously, just like it is with crime in general, is pretty complex. It's not something you say, if your dad's an alcoholic, you're absolutely going to become an alcoholic. It might actually send you the other direction. We divide up alcoholics into two categories. You know this. Type 1 are the ones that start late in life, had no interest in alcohol young, didn't try it young, made it through teens, college years, first work years. It's generally once they're settled in their career and start socializing with colleagues and things like this is where they start drinking and it becomes a problem. But they are still able to generally function because they came into it so late. They've got a lot of patterns of behavior that will keep them functioning because it's already been there. The type 2, this is my 8-year-old that's already drinking. Okay, they come into it very, very early. The problems show up very, very early. So we start seeing all kinds of issues that have to be addressed before they're 20 years old. The other one may not even start till they're in their 30s. Now, what does this cost us? Just like any other bad behaviors, a lot of money, obviously. Treating these individuals, as I said, someone comes into our jail, chronic alcoholic, they're about to go through the DTs. Most times that is not something that can be managed within the jail, just like some of our addicts. And we have to pay, county pays for it, city pays for it. They have to go to an inpatient facility or a drug rehab hospital environment to detox. Those things aren't cheap. Most of them can run several $100s a day. Okay. Obviously, a person who drinks is going to have all kinds of other issues. Two of the most severe is when the liver starts breaking down, cirrhosis, scar tissue on the liver, doesn't work as well. And once it happens, there is no reversing it, there's no fixing it. You can keep it from getting worse, but you simply cannot reverse or fix what's there. And of course, all the way into liver cancer and liver failure. Affects the kidneys, because it detoxes through there too. We have a medical unit nearby here. All it is dialysis. That is the entire facility for inmates. They have, I don't know how many, I would say probably 25 or 30 dialysis machines that are running 24/7, 365. At no time do they not have those things hooked up to some inmate, which means they have to have specially trained medical staff that know how to run this equipment, monitor the inmates. Each treatment for dialysis is approximately 3 hours per person. Who's paying for that? Okay. So that sort of thing gets enormously expensive. Obviously, if a person is a chronic drinker, they can't make it to work. When you go out to buy your first car, I highly suggest you research how to figure out what day of the week your car is manufactured. You never want to buy a car that is manufactured on a Monday or a Friday. Ever. Why? Because we go back to those lovely things called, what? I'm sorry? No. What? The manufacturing process. Oh, these nice long lines, one car after the next. Thank you, Henry Ford, for
Assembly line.
assembly line. So, you mentioned it. Monday, we got the hangovers. And these guys are building your cars. Oops, dropped. Oh, hell, who cares? And now you have that nice piece of metal that's rattling around the inside of your door for the rest of its life. Parts that are not put on correctly. And so on. Fridays, well, we need to start drinking. So people call in on Fridays so they can start their weekend early. Which means people get moved around on that assembly line. And now they're doing a job that they've never done before. And a lot of the jobs that they have to do are done blindly. For example, this guy's putting 3 bolts somewhere, and he's supposed to reach in and do the bolts, but he never gets to see it. Well, if you've never done that job, and those cars go by really quick, I think it's like a minute or a minute and a half. Every car comes off the assembly line. Okay? Wednesdays are manager specials. That's when they get pissed off at the managers and mess with the car. Ideally, you want a car manufactured on Tuesday or Thursday. Least likely to have problems. Okay? Think about doing it. Assembly line. 8, 10 hours a day. Reach. Put the screw in. Reach. Reach. That's your entire job for 8 to 10 hours. You don't move pretty much out of that spot. You grab your bolt, you put it in. You grab your bolt, you put it in. That's your job. Apparently, they're quite well known for, oops, I dropped it in the mechanism that runs the assembly line. So the assembly line stops, all the alarms go off, yada, yada, yada. Just so they can have a break from the monotony. If you truly want to know how working on an assembly line works, you got someone sitting in the back seat there that actually is from Detroit and worked on those assembly lines. So yeah, we know. We know.
Takes boring to a whole new level.
So, do you want drunk doing this? Just recently, DFW pilot was walking through. There, they have a special TSA line they go through. Smelled the alcohol and got him pulled off the flight. I don't want this dude sniffing alcohol within 20-foot radius before he gets in that frickin' damn plane. Not with my bot in that aluminum tube. How many do we not see? I mean, we see the disaster with the cars. They're driving a train, a boat, a cruise ship. Okay. Yeah, costs us a lot of money. Their estimates there run $250 billion. I got a feeling that's a very, very low estimate. It's probably a whole lot more than that. Obviously, we gain a tolerance. I told you about our gal who came in at a 0.43. Okay, if one of us did that, we'd be dead. Okay. The way this is processed, just like anything else, through enzymes. So anytime you see a word that ends in that ACE, that's an enzyme. Okay. So dehydrogenase is what denatures and processes alcohol. That's the enzyme. As you get further down your path of drinking, you're producing more of this, which allows you to tolerate more alcohol. And then it just builds up. It also means they push it out a little faster because the body's kind of speeding up its ability to use it, which means the effects wear off, which means you need more, and you see how this just keeps snowballing until they're drinking more and more and more. Obviously, there's all kinds of physical stuff that can come out of this as well. This is where we get the blackouts and so on, but they will hit a limit. Generally, things start really snowballing into disaster when we hit that liter a day mark. I don't even know how anybody can do that. Full liter or more a day. That's a lot of alcohol. So, they've reached that. Now we're going to take it away from you. Oh, there we go. Okay. They have their own symptoms like so many other drugs. Okay. Yeah, the hangover, severe. Okay. Tylenol ain't going to touch it here. One thing they talk about, they get afraid to go to sleep because of the intense nightmare activity. So they almost don't want to sleep, but they're so overtired they need to, so it kind of feeds on itself. Of course, the shakes start happening. Okay, and I mean, they can't hold, a cup of water. Plus a few other things. Peaks about 36 hours, but here's what saves them. Now, we're not talking DTs here. 48 hours, which is one of the shortest main withdrawal times of any of our drugs. So it goes pretty quick. And if they have support, they're in a medical facility or some other, they can get through it. They can get through it. It's miserable. Not as miserable as some of the drugs. And of course, like I said, it's over fast. So that's to their advantage. Okay? That's when the real work starts. Now, for those that are way down the road of alcoholism, the DTs take it to a whole new level. These are far more dangerous. Okay? The hallucinations that they can go through and delusions can easily get them killed. Or they will mutilate, what we call self-mutilation, themselves because of the belief that, the bug is under the skin. Usually starts in the arms, and they'll claw or bite at their own arms, but it can be any part of the body. And they'll start chewing on it in an attempt to get whatever they think's inside of them out. Not unusual for people that are experiencing this to end up having to be fully restrained, what we call 5-point restraints, because the damage they will do to themselves or in their panic to you in an attempt to get to themselves is pretty high. Okay, so and there's just not any drug we can give them to ease it up. They've simply got to sweat their way through it, and it's pretty panic inducing. 3 to 4 days, so it takes a little while before it shows up. Okay, and during this whole mess, obviously their heart can just give out just from stress, especially if this is an older alcoholic or they have any pre-existing medical conditions. So this can absolutely send them over the edge. Being dehydrated because they're not taking in anything. They can't keep it down, so if they're going to give them anything, this is about the only thing they can do is start an IV with just straight sugar water, what we call D5W. It's just 5% sugar dissolved in distilled water. That's all it is, but it's to keep them hydrated. Okay, because dehydration can send you into a fatal heart attack as your body's salts get out of whack. Because remember, all of the muscles in your body, including your heart, diaphragm, they all contract because of those salts, sodium, calcium, potassium. If they get out of whack, yeah, you got a problem. Remember, that's the drugs we use in executions for exactly that reason, because it causes fatal heart attacks. Okay? And they can commit suicide over it, just because, you know, they're so sure that they're being eaten from the inside by ants or whatever it may be. So, yeah, medical. If they're at the DT level, it has to be done under medical supervision, and very, very likely they'll end up in restraints, if not a rubber room. Now, we mentioned the liver, okay? These are the 3 stages of it going bad. Fatty liver, just fat starts accumulating inside the cells within the liver. That is something we can reverse. It's actually not even super duper difficult, but it can be reversed. Okay, this is the earliest stage, and this is not when they're usually looking for help, unfortunately. Okay, this is not something that they pay attention to or go to a doctor for. So usually they're advanced past this before they get medical attention. And that's where we move into our second stage. And the reason they start asking for help is because they notice a very alarming symptom. Eyeballs turn yellow. And when I say yellow, I mean yellow. It's very bright. Okay, this is no pale sunshine yellow here. Okay, this is banana boat yellow. Can't miss it. And that's jaundice. Okay. Now the liver has been scarred. It's struggling to function, which is why you get the jaundice. It's releasing bile, okay, which colors things. This is not reversible. Once you've gone down this road, you can't reverse what has happened, the hepatitis. You can keep it from getting worse, which is the goal. Okay, you can stop what's happening. That's the reversible. But the scarring that's already happened, you're not going to undo. You cannot fix that. So that's why I like to say it's kind of half and half. Okay. The last level is cirrhotic liver. That scar tissue is getting so heavy that the livers can't do its job. It just can't. And very often for an alcoholic, when they get to this level, the jaundice level is where the skin is turning yellow. It's not just the eyes. Everything's turning yellow. At the very end stage of this, for example, you go to pick one up to put them like on a gurney to take them to the hospital. You have to be enormously careful because their skin is so destroyed from the jaundice that comes off in your hands. So they're losing their outer layers just because it's dead. Okay? Again, if they shut down altogether, you're not going to get any further damage, but you're simply not fixing what's there. You're at liver transplant stage. And just like me getting a new set of lungs as a smoker, they're going to go, we're not giving you one, too bad. You're an alcoholic, the chances of you getting a new liver, not high. We're going to give it to or they are going to give it to the person who was born with a bad liver. Because they're not a drinker, so that liver is actually going to keep them alive for a long period of time. If I hand a perfectly good 1 in a million liver to an alcoholic, what's he going to do? He's going to turn around and destroy that one too. Better it goes to one who can actually live off it. And they make these kinds of decisions all the time simply because there's only so many to go around. There's only so many to go around. Now, one good thing about this is you don't have to transplant the whole liver. You can take an adult-sized liver, it's actually pretty big, and cut it into parts, and that gives you 3 people from 1 liver on average. You can take a liver out of a child and put it in an adult, and it will regrow. It's one of the oddities. It's the only organ that does that, but makes it very useful. In a transplant scenario is if you only have 1 liver, you can take up to 3 matches. So that's 3 people that can survive off of that. But if you're an alcoholic, you still ain't going to be one of those 3. They just won't do it. Kind of understand why. And cancers, obviously. It's not considered a carcinogen. They've just noticed some increased levels of specific cancers in heavy-duty drinkers. Pharynx, anybody know what that is? It's your voice box. And larynx. Okay. Large number of these are associated with drinking, and the only thing they can think of is that the alcohol is constantly coating it and perhaps damaging the surface cells. Not quite sure. And then there's, as far as other cancers, there really isn't much of a connection, very little, if any, to them. Okay. So it's mainly those throat cancers where we run into a problem with it. You can also end up with what I call early stage dementia. Remember that brain shrinkage problem? Okay. So the brain starts not working very well either. You've got less of it, and it's just not working, and it's known as the Wernicke-Korsakoff. They start being unable to function well in a cognitive basis, something that is similar to dementia, even though it's not actually dementia. Okay, so brain mass starts shrinking down. There's some changes going on as the brain tries to function with what it's got. And the main problem we see is they can't solve problems, simple problems, okay, and we start seeing some serious memory loss. And again, it can easily, until somebody knows that they are an alcoholic, they'll think it's dementia. It's not. It's this. Okay. So that syndrome there, we get the confusion and the disorientation, get the bouncing eyeballs. Okay, they'll do it on their own without, making them follow a finger. Their eyeballs are just doing it because the brain is losing its ability to control fine muscles. So movement and body coordination go off because, again, they're losing that fine motor control. We don't think about it, we just do it. But when you go, something as simple as writing, how much muscle control does it take? How long did you spend in grade school with that ridiculous paper that they gave everybody to do the big letter and the little letters and all that crap? Weeks, months, whatever, depending on how picky your teacher was. Okay? So, it takes a while. Well, they lose that. Absolutely lose that. One of the things that they have found, thiamine, one of the B vitamins, can help with it. Research is still out. We don't really know for sure. If this moves up the ladder, there's a Korsakoff psychosis. This is where we have severe amnesia. They just forget things altogether. And that might mean forgetting a spouse, a child, a work colleague that they've known for 25 years that they no longer recognize. Okay? And this weird thing known as confabulation. That's where they think they did something years ago, and somehow that becomes something else. So they had a friend, for example,
that was in Vietnam. And they've been good friends for years, but now he doesn't remember him as a friend. Now he's telling everybody about his experiences in Vietnam, though he never set foot there. So they mix different experiences into their own, and usually people just think, why are they telling these big old stories here? They're not trying to. Their brain can no longer separate, that's a story that came from somebody else. They now believe it is their own. Also a symptom of dementia. Although for those, they're retelling stories of their own. It's not somebody else. We already mentioned this, so I'll go through this last one. It's pretty quick here, but fetal alcohol syndrome, obviously, if you drink, it goes directly through the placenta to the baby. They receive all their nourishment through that placental cord blood. So once the alcohol's in your blood, it goes to the baby. Okay? We know all kinds of birth defects. It can be small ones, and it can be huge. Children with their hands and feet webbed, missing body parts. One I read about, I know nothing about it personally, but read about, it was born without a brain. There was a very thin layer of what they said was brain tissue, like millimeters thick, attached to the inner part of the skull, but that was it. The rest of it was gone. It was just a space. Dang. So, we know these things happen. Where they make the diagnosis, obviously they'll ask mom, has she drank? Yeah, she's going to tell you maybe, maybe not. One of the biggest things is the growth is off, whether it's in the womb that the baby's not developing or after birth and it's not developing. For those of you who haven't had a kid yet, those first visits will all be about the height, the weight, where they should be, those milestones. The child should be at 1 week after birth should be here, and a month after birth should be here, and so on. That's how they figure out something might be wrong, so they can diagnose it earlier. Okay? Are there any kind of central nervous system problems? Do we have any mental retardation? Okay, Down syndrome, very, very common with fetal alcohol. Okay, and there are some oddities that can show up in both the skull and the face. Common one. I don't know if you're aware, but when a baby's born, just to make it easier to give birth, the top of the head's not fused. Okay? There's all the bone there, but it's not fused, so it can bend. So when a baby's first born, they look really weird. They're kind of squished and long and really looks weird. That's why they tend to wait a few minutes before they show it to mom, because she might freak out. For the fetal alcohol baby, that may never change. It stays that way. And there's a few other facial abnormalities that can show up. So it's very obvious. How often does it happen? Well, there it is. Again, that first trimester, when that neural tube is forming, it is at its most vulnerable. There was a drug years ago that when they came out with this, they were like, oh my God. If there's anything women wanted to get rid of was the problem with morning sickness, because it can be obviously very, very, very bad. So they developed this drug to deal with severe nausea. Thalidomide. Worked great. Unless you were pregnant. Well, gee, isn't that when everybody was taking it? What they didn't know is that, because you don't test on pregnant women, if you remember your research methods, thalidomide is a drug that is what we call tetragenic, meaning it has massive impacts on the formation of a fetus. Babies born without arms, legs, organs on the outside, missing organs altogether, missing part of their face. And it was massive. And of course, that didn't count all the ones that died in utero. They died early enough that they're absorbed by the mother. Of course, the rest of them, some miscarriage or stillbirth. And they were happening around the world. Well, thalidomide is off the market. But
it also taught something to the medical community about that first few weeks. How serious and deadly the problem can be if there's an impact to those first few weeks of fetal development. And they can show it now in a lab, all these fancy microscopes and stuff. They will join said egg and sperm in a petri dish and then introduce the drug at different times. And this is all filmed under one of those monster $1 million microscope things. And you can watch how it goes sideways. It's terrifying. This is the cellular level, and it's still terrifying to watch. So, yeah, that's why now it used to be a drink. Now don't even think about it. Allow your friend to wave it under your nose and breathe. That's about as close as you should get to alcohol. How do we finally call these things? Say a person actually has the alcohol use disorder. Well, like so many others, we don't call people addicts, psychopaths, sociopaths. All of these have been deemed negative impact terminology, so they've gotten rid of them. And then under the current DSM-5, it is an alcohol use disorder, and they have, mild, moderate, severe. So what is that? Well, depends on how many drinks, how often you drink, how much do you remember what you drink. They've got a whole laundry list that they go through as they start their treatment. Obviously, AA are of the importance of simply stopping drinking. That's it. That's all. That's the only way to handle it. It's just stop. Others say, well, maybe we don't need to stop altogether, that we can learn how to drink responsibly. And these are just a couple of the ones that are more likely to say the smart way, because by telling people they can't drink at all, then they don't want to stop. If we tell them we can get you to learn how to control it, they're more likely to cut their drinking down. Jury's out on both of them, but some of the treatment options we have those that we can intervene with a medication, and then we have those that deal with it from a mental side, the desire, the ramifications, and so on. So AA, of course, would be the number one there, and on the biological side, we have various medications. So the big one is called antabuse. They drink this stuff, and in and of itself, it's fine. If they don't have any alcohol, nothing happens. They're cool. They drink alcohol, and they are going to be throwing up to the point that they're sure they're throwing up their entire internal organ structure. It's very, very violently emetic. So it's kind of negative reinforcement here. Say, you drink, this is what happens. Anybody see a way around this? They don't take the drug. They're not going to have any adverse reactions if they're not taking the antabuse, so they just don't take it. So easy to get around. These are a couple of the drugs that they use to help get the craving for the drug down. We see that now with a lot of different things. We've got drugs that help with food craving, drugs that help with other drug cravings. So no surprise that we have two drugs actually, they're just chemically slightly different, that deal with alcohol cravings. But obviously it's not going to be alone. If that's all you're using, they're not going to make it. They're absolutely not going to make it. There's just too much else involved. Modifying the GABA transmitter simply means they're not getting any kind of pleasure out of it anymore. Okay, so there's a couple of those. Reducing the feel good from the alcohol. Okay, it's actually for anti-nausea. This one's not as bad as thalidomide, but it's still not allowed for pregnant women. Anyways,
But it also, in an alcoholic, reduces that feel good from drinking. So, okay. Still, the number one program probably will continue, is AA. Over the close to a century now they've been in existence, it has a pretty strong track record of working. And they acknowledge that people are going to fall off the wagon. And they may fall off the wagon 20 times, 30 times. But maybe it's that 31st time that sticks. Maybe it's the 50th time that sticks. Maybe they only made it to, it's 12 steps. Maybe they only made it to step 2. Then the next time it's step 3. Okay. And they are absolutely open. They never turn somebody down because they failed before. It's not the way it works. They will just keep doing it. And one thing that has been very beneficial, group support. She's a recovering alcoholic. She's gone through AA. She's received all her 12 steps. She's got her coin. She's 5 years sober now. And I'm just starting. Who am I hearing from? Someone who's been there, done that, got the t-shirt to prove it. Versus this nice little counselor that never drinks, never has had a drink, telling me to do this, that, and the other thing. Who am I going to pay attention to? The one that's been there, done that. Peer support works across the board. Doesn't matter what behavior we're trying to modify. Peer support works the best, and AA recognize that. The biggest thing they've been criticized for is, as people put it, well, they shouldn't include God and religion in it. They don't. All they ask is that people acknowledge there is something bigger than themselves. Call it whatever you want. God, Allah, whatever. That there's a higher power of some sort that you can reach out to. There's no Bible thumping. It's not allowed. You can't. I don't believe you can even bring in religious works into the meetings. So, no, religion's not a big part of it. It's just that one step there, acknowledging that there's someone else, something else. And it's a lifelong thing. Remember, 12 years sober doesn't mean they're still not an alcoholic. They are. It just means they're an alcoholic who hasn't taken a drink in 12 years. Okay? Smart side, these are the ones that use a different thing. They don't like the term alcoholic. They don't like alcohol abuse. They don't want any of this. Very secular, okay, because they claim AA is religious. But you have the power to overcome this obstacle. And we're going to help you do it. Okay. And they use rational, emotive, behavioral therapy. I won't get into that because there's a whole psychiatric course on it. It's pretty intense, but nonetheless, that's the part of the program they use. Okay. Also based on peers. Okay. They still absolutely use the peer side. But we know AA works. There's a reason we have NA, because AA works. So there's NA for narcotics, Al-Anon for our teens, and so on, and families. Okay, so we know these programs work, but again, you cannot put a gun to somebody's head and say you need to go through this program any more than you can for any other addict. You can lock an alcoholic up, you can lock an addict up, and we have all these programs. The number one program you'll find in prisons, AA and NA. They're all over the place. You can drag them there. You can force them to go. But it's not going to help worth a damn unless they want to be there. That's all there is to it. But it will work if they give it a chance. It has. Long history. Questions about anything?